Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Adam sent me notes, and Steve, check out this story. We've talked a lot about AI and all different AI products that are out there and how they're being misused. So we've talked about, for instance, that they're writing police reports, for instance. They're transcribing notes of conversations between patients and doctors and so on. And so the thing about it is that it's an amazing thing they've accomplished with making AI work the way it does today. But it clearly isn't ready to take over some of these tasks. And I've done a bunch of stories about lawyers who have filed briefs with courts where the other side goes through the brief and goes, that case doesn't exist. That other case you cited doesn't exist. It turns out a bunch of cases you cited don't exist, and if you remove them from your brief, you got nothing. And so you keep asking yourself, where else could this pop up and in what setting? And so here we go from Alaska, and the Alaska Beacon. Claire Strempel wrote this. False citations show that Alaska education officials relied on generative AI, raising broader questions. And that's putting it nicely. The state's top education official relied on generative AI to draft a proposed policy on cell phone use in Alaska schools. It resulted in a document which cites academic studies that don't exist, and it wasn't caught until it was put out there. The document did not disclose that it had been created using AI, and at least some of that AI-generated false information ended up in front of the State Board of Education and early development members. Policymakers in education elsewhere in government rely on well-supported research, at least they should. The commissioner's use of false AI-generated content points to a lack of state policy around the use of AI tools. So instead of talking about cell phone use, maybe you should be studying AI use. A department spokesperson at first called the fake resources placeholders. They were placeholders. They were cited throughout the body of a resolution posted on the department's website in advance of a State Board of Education meeting, which was held recently. Later, the state education commissioner said they were part of a first draft and that she used generative AI to create the citations. Now, come on. You're doing a draft, a rough draft of something. You don't put fake stuff into it with the intention of pulling it out later. Why would you do that? And you're talking to a guy who's written 12 books. I don't make up fake stuff and go, hey, this guy said this. I'll take that out later. She said she realized her error before the meeting and sent correct citations to board members. And then the board adopted that resolution. However, mistaken references and other vestiges of what's known as hallucinations exist in the corrected document, which was later distributed to the department. And so the one that was voted on by the board contained some leftover hallucinations. The resolution directs the department to craft a model policy for cell phone restrictions. The resolution published on the state's website cited supposed scholarly articles that cannot be found at the web addresses listed and whose titles did not show up in broader online searches. And that's the sad part, is how easy this is to catch. So let's suppose that you're in a time crunch, you have AI write this report for you, and it cites a bunch of really cool studies that you've never heard of. And you couldn't have heard of them because AI invented them. So you Google them, and they come back as not found. Okay, maybe you should pull them out then. Maybe. 4 of the document's 6 citations appear to be studies published in scientific journals, but were false. The journals the state cited do exist, so the journals are real, but the titles referenced are not. Instead, work on different subjects is posted on the listed links. So an assistant professor of computer science and linguistics at Brown University and a research scientist for Google reviewed the citations and said they look like other fake citations she has seen AI generate. That is exactly the type of pattern that one sees with AI hallucinated citations. So think about this. The experts are now saying that they can learn what the hallucinations look like. But people using the product apparently aren't that good at it. A hallucination is the term used when an AI system generates misleading or false information, usually because the model doesn't have enough data or makes incorrect assumptions. So you ask the program to write a paper in support of this certain position, and cite sources that support this argument. Well, if it can't find sources, it makes them up. So you get this paper back, and it's really well crafted. It says this, 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 and this for these following reasons, and the experts agree. And you read it and go, bam, that's what I want right there. Except the citations are fake. It's just very typical that you'd see these fake citations that would have a real journal, sometimes even a real person's name, like for an author, a plausible name, but not corresponding to a real thing. It's that lack of a real thing that matters. That's just like the pattern of citations you'd expect of a language model. At least we've seen them do that. The documents reference section included URLs, which led to scholarly articles on different subjects. Instead of banning mobile phones improves student performance in the journal Computers and Human Behavior, the URL the state posted led to the article Sexualized Behaviors on Facebook. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a different article. It might be important for teachers to understand, but it's another story. A search for the correct title did not yield any results. The same was true for 2 studies the state said were to be found in the Journal of Educational Psychology. After the Alaska Beacon, the people who published this right here, asked the department to produce the false studies, officials updated the online document. When asked if the department had used AI, a spokesperson said the citations were simply there as filler until correct information be inserted. If you know the correct information is out there, use it. You don't placeholders. Many of those sources listed were placeholders during the drafting process, used while final sources were critiqued, compared, and under review. This is a process many of us have grown accustomed to working with, he wrote in a Friday email. Oh, no. Tell me that you're putting in fake information to hold the space of real information you're checking. Why not put the unchecked information in there and then check it? And if it doesn't check out, yank it. But putting fake information, which you know will never stay, doesn't make any sense. In that case, put in square brackets with nothing there. That's a placeholder. So the draft apparently was written, and then someone else fed the draft into a generative AI platform just to see if it could be helpful in finding additional sources. They found that it was ultimately not helpful, primarily because this got caught. And they said that it was a first draft that had been posted in error and that it was later corrected. Nobody's doubting that. But vestiges of the first document are still found throughout the document that they said the board reviewed and voted on. For example, the department's updated document still refers readers to a fictitious 2019 study, the American Psychological Association, to support the resolution's claim that students in schools with cell phone restrictions showed lower levels of stress and higher levels of academic achievement. The new citation leads to a study that looks at mental health rather than academic outcomes. Anecdotally, that study did not find a direct correlation between cell phone use and depression or loneliness. While that claim is not correctly sourced in the document, there is a study that shows smartphones have an effect on course comprehension and well-being, but among college students rather than adolescents. A researcher and professor at New York Tech who published that study said that even though she has not studied the effects of cell phones on adolescents, she thinks her findings would only be amplified in that population. She says their brains are still developing. They're very malleable. If you look at the research around smartphones, a lot of it is mirroring that of a substance addiction or any other type of addictive behavior. She said the tricky part about actually studying adolescents, like the titles of the false studies suggest, is that researchers must get permission from schools to research the students, and of course that's a pain. So there's more to the story than that. But basically what happened is they wanted to come up with a policy statewide for cell phone use in schools by children. And so they started working on this paper. Someone fed it into an AI program, and it kicked out a beefed up version of the same paper, but now it's got sources to support what you're saying. And they claim that those sources were put in by them as placeholders, and then they later removed them all, except they didn't remove everything. And so we all know what happened here. This is the same thing that happens every place else. Somebody's wishful thinking is that I hope this AI can create the perfect document for me and save me some time. And then they don't notice that, oh, by the way, it cites a bunch of sources. I probably should check to see if those sources are real. Because by now, if you don't know that these AI things are making stuff up, hallucinating, if you don't know that, you've got bigger problems than whether or not kids are using cell phones in schools. And just because I have to point this out, I am of a certain age. And when I was young, cell phones didn't exist. And we had a phone in our house, and it was in the kitchen on the wall with a cord about this long on it. You want to make a phone call, go stand in the kitchen. Phone rings, go to the kitchen. And later on, we got a second phone, a children's phone, that had a longer cord on it, so you could take it into your room and so on. But cell phones didn't come out for much, much longer. And now I'll see a little kid walking by talking on an iPhone. I know how expensive phones are these days. And remember, I'm one of 6 children. I've got 5 older brothers. And when I was growing up, I had to do things like save money to buy my own bicycle. Okay, I bought a bicycle with money I saved doing my paper route. Could I have afforded a cell phone? Now, I understand that if they had them back then, they would have cost less, or if I was a child now, things would be a little different. But I guarantee you that my mom and my dad would not have said, hey, gather around, boys. We're all boys. Gather around, boys. We're getting you all smartphones. That would not have happened. It would not have happened. I've mentioned recently in another video that when I was a little kid, our television broke. We had a television. It was black and white. It broke. And somebody went and told my dad, said, hey, Dad, TV broke. And he goes, oh, that's too bad. Someone else went and told my mom. She goes, oh, that's too bad. Are we going to get another one? Not yet. And we didn't get another one for years. So, I mean, it forced me to do things like read books or play outside. But both of my parents were educators. And they never came out and said, we think you should watch less television and read more books. They never said that. And eventually they did get us another television, which we did watch. But the point simply is, I'm reasonably certain my parents would not say, hey, all you, here you go. Merry Christmas. New iPhones for everybody. Imagine the cost doing that for 6 kids. It would have been cost prohibitive, I believe. And so what I don't know, and I know there's people in the audience with children or grandchildren who would know how many kids at school have got smartphones or cell phones, and what kind of an outcast you'd be if you didn't have one, right? I assume that's the case, but I suppose it depends on the age, right? Do all kindergartners have smartphones? Don't know. 10th graders? Probably. And I'm sure it depends on what part of the country and also on how your demographics are doing in that region financially. But there you go. So here we have an educator who apparently runs the state Department of Education, wants to publish a document about cell phone use in the schools. And it's created by generative AI, and we know it because it contained hallucinations to articles that didn't exist. And if you went and looked, you couldn't find the articles, although the magazines existed that they were supposed to publish in, the journals they were in. And then when they were called out, somebody removed those and rewrote the piece without those citations in it. But some of the text from the citations still made it into the final piece, and that's a problem. That's a problem. So there are going to be all kinds of other problems coming with AI. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But the fact that people still don't know how not ready for prime time this is blows my mind. So Adam sent me that thing. So like Clara Strempel wrote there for the Alaska Beacon. False citations show Alaska education official relied on generative AI raising broader questions. Questions or comments? Put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. If a book about failures doesn't sell well, is it a success?